Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the New Muslim Workshop. My name's Mahmoud, and today I'd like to talk to you guys about an issue that's been bothering me ever since I came into contact with someone who's affected by it. This is the phenomenon of the Muslim man-child. Stick around.
Welcome to the New Muslim Workshop.
Welcome back. The phenomenon I'm talking about, this phenomenon of the Muslim man-child, if we were to look at the characteristics of the man-child, some of these traits that are particular to the man-child are someone who is not interested in finding long-term work. They are not interested in moving out of their parents' house and establishing their own family and getting married. Someone who is not interested in having children. Someone who would rather have a pet than a child. Someone who most of their money is spent on clothing or accessories or cars or vacations. Someone who wants his wife to work. Someone who wants his wife to share in the expenses of the home if he is married. And then ironically, someone who is happy to post Islamic content on social media, etc., but doesn't live that lifestyle. It's kind of hypocritical. It's weird. So the question here is, where does this come from? And I think from my observations, this almost repulsion, being repulsed from responsibility. The core idea is that person does not want to be responsible for a wife, does not want to be even responsible for themselves, does not want to be responsible for having children. So if you don't want to get a job, you don't want to be responsible for making money and contributing to your parents' home when you are living with your parents. Now, depending on where you come from, I'm Middle Eastern, I'm Arab, and it's absolutely normal for a male who is unmarried to live with his parents. However, one of the things that must happen is that person needs to go and get a job and contribute to the home that he lives in by paying some of the expenses, by basically alleviating some of the responsibility that is upon his parents' shoulders. What is happening in the last few years, and I see this in many places, including my extended family, is that some of these people, they can't hold down a job. And when they do hold down a job, they don't contribute to the home. They do not make life easier for their parents, who could be on their way to retirement. They could be in their late 50s or late 60s, and that's it. You know, they're not going to be making any money anytime soon afterwards. They might be living off their retirement. And so for an adult, because that's what they're people who graduated university, they're staying at home, and they can't hold down a job because they're not responsible. They're not responsible in that they don't want to wake up early. They don't want to go and be ordered to do work. They don't want to receive orders from somebody. They don't want to have somebody who is a supervisor upon them. And so what does that mean? That means that person is not contributing to the family. He's not even contributing to society by being a productive member of society. And that person would also, in the same vein, would want to stay out with his friends late and would therefore not wake up early and therefore not want to have a day job, as it were, because they would want to hang out with their friends all the time. So when I was in that situation where I was not married, I still had not gotten married, found a wife, I was living in my parents' home, which is normal, and I was contributing by paying for food. I was contributing for paying for utilities, for the internet connection, for whatever it is. But you're contributing. You're a productive member of society, and you are a contributing member of the family. Once I found a wife and I got married and moved out of my parents' home, many people would sometimes still stay with their parents and say, well, my parents have a home. What's the point of me moving out and renting if my parents have a home that I can live in? I can live in my room. Well, I mean, other than the fact that it really depends on the financial aspect of it. If you're doing this because you cannot afford to, fair enough. You're not really putting your parents in any extra financial strain, especially if you are contributing financially to the pool of finances in your parents' home. And obviously, your wife will get to know your parents better, etc. But once your financial situation gets better, get your own apartment. Rent it. I'm not saying go buy your own house. I'm saying go rent an apartment and be independent. Now, this aspect of I don't want the responsibility because my desires supersede everything else is not from the Muslim psyche. You should not even consider this. The concept of individualism is a Western construct. In Islam, we look upon the benefit of the whole. Of course, the family is the basic unit that comprises society. And so when these people who are man children, they look like men, but they don't want to act like men. And when we say acting like a man, I mean the idea of being responsible, being a provider, being a protector. This is how the Prophet ﷺ, Prophet of Islam, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this is how he taught us men how to be men. Okay? When the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that is narrated by Ibn Umar, may Allah be pleased with Ibn Umar and Umar, who reported that the Prophet ﷺ said, all of you are shepherds and each of you is responsible for his flock. A man is the shepherd of the people of his house and he is responsible. A woman is the shepherd of the house of her husband and she is responsible. Each of you is a shepherd and each is responsible for his flock. Now, when the idea of I don't want to be responsible comes into play, and then you have this bit, well, okay, the only way for you to curb your sexual desires is to get married. If you're saying I don't want the responsibility of marriage, how are you curbing these sexual desires? There's no halal way of doing it otherwise. Marriage is the only halal way for you to curb your sexual desires. So the second part is what? Well, I'm going to curb them outside. Means haram, means zina. Now, in this day of an age, obviously, the hookup culture makes everything very easy for you to rid yourself of this sexual desire or to become addicted to it. But zina is a massive, massive sin in Islam. So for you to go and say, well, I'm gonna get my desire handled through this way, no, it's not acceptable. In Islam, this is absolutely haram. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. And don't even come close to zina. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الزِّنَا. Don't even think about coming close to it. So this is a major sin in Islam. Next part of it is, okay, the reason why we get married is partially to curb our sexual desires. What's the next one? It's to have children. So I don't want to have children. Remember what we said? We said the characteristics include that person saying, well, no, you know what? I don't want to have children because I don't want the responsibility of having children. What? Let me educate you with this hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. And the hadith is from Abu Dawood 2050. That narrated that Ma'qil ibn Yasir said, a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and said, I found a woman who is of good lineage and is beautiful, but she does not bear children. Should I marry her? He said no. The Prophet said no. Then he came again with the same question and told him, and he, the Prophet ﷺ, told him not to marry her. Then he came a third time with the same question. This guy's really insistent. And he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, marry those who are loving and fertile, for I will be proud of your great numbers before the other nations on the day of judgment. This is classed Sahih by Al-Albani. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, if you get married and you are fertile, have children. Have as many as you can. Because of financial constraint, a lot of people will say, no, I can't afford to have children. Habibi, oh loved one, O brother in Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you in the Quran, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ خَشْيَةَ إِمْلَاقٍ نَحْنُ نَرْزُقُهُمْ وَإِيَّاكُمْ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran tells you that do not murder your children, do not kill your children, because you are afraid of the financial burden. This is something that the Arabs used to do. They would do something called wa'd al-banat. And they would bury their female children because they would consider them a burden. And if they had a large number of children who are male and female, they would prefer to have the male because the male would be able to fight in these struggles and they would be able to work, and so they were better workers. This was how the ancient Arabs used to consider women or girls. And so they would bury their children in the sand. They would kill their own children. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them, do not fear that Allah has given you these children. We will give them the rizq. We will provide their sustenance for them. Meaning that Allah has rizq, has bounty, has sustenance that is written for you. He also has sustenance that is written for them, for the children. And so you can increase your own bounty, your own rizq, by by having children and providing for your children. And that was something else that the Sahaba used to do. The Sahaba would say, if we wanted to get rich, we would get married. And so Allah would provide for them and their wives, because their sustenance for their wives would be included in the rizq that is for them. So it's important to know, as Muslims, we do not believe that having children reduces from your sustenance, from your rizq. However, obviously don't go crazy, and don't do it to the point where your wife's health is in danger. You with me so far? So that's something that needs to be kept in mind. That when we talk about having children, it is important to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the sustainer of all, and He includes their rizq and adds it to yours. And the Prophet ﷺ told us that مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ الْبَاءَةَ فَلْيَتَزَوَّجْ. Okay? The one that is capable, that is able to provide for a wife, should get married. مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ الْبَاءَةَ فَلْيَتَزَوَّجْ. So the Prophet ﷺ, as the Prophet of Islam, is telling you, if you can afford to get married, get married. If you are able to have children, have children. In the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is asked, can I marry a woman that is beautiful but she can't bear children? He says no. A lot of the women will say, well, what about I can't bear children? Does that mean I can't get married? For a woman that is incapable of having children, of bearing children, she can marry a man that is infertile. And the other option is, if a woman is infertile, she can be a second wife to a man that already has children. He already has children with his first wife, she can be the second wife. This is halal, this is not haram. And this curbs the sexual need of the person, of the Muslim. So you have a people that are not interested in responsibility. I'll tell you the far side of it. In Japan, the way that they've handled the financial burden upon the person has backfired to the point where people are not interested in getting married. They're not interested in getting married. Not only that, the social anxiety that they have in Japan has reached a level where they have a subset of society that, they have a name for it. Let me read this. A form of severe social withdrawal called hikikimori has been frequently described in Japan and is characterized by adolescents and young adults who become recluses in their parents' homes, unable to work or go to school for months or years. What? This is a person that is unable to function because of the way that their society is structured. In the West, they have this new thing called voluntary childlessness. Voluntary childlessness is where you are basically not interested in having kids, going against the fitrah, going against the natural inclination of us as human beings. and saying, I'm not interested in becoming a parent. I cannot afford to become a parent. Remember, we already spoke about this. And so what I'm going to do is go get a pet. They're my children. And you'll see this a lot. Oh, my baby, my child. Where wealthy people, even wealthy people, will say, you know what, I'm not interested in having a child. There's a skit for famous comedian, don't like him very much, but anyway, where he says, I'm not interested in having children because in the end they're just going to be a burden, a financial burden, and I'd rather sit home and dry my tears with this money. And then this is a meme, in fact, where the idea of how people who are childless are happier because they have a higher quality of life. They can travel and they can meet their desires. If they have a desire that they want, they can go ahead and they have the money to fulfill this desire. This is nonsense. This goes against the fitrah of humanity. Now, you're going to have Elon Musk and you're going to have all these people that are warning you, telling you that the global fertility rate has dropped. That's their problem. They don't want to have kids. That's their problem. They want to live and chase their desires. That's their problem. But for the Muslims to do it, we have a problem. For the Muslims to say, I'm not interested in getting married, or if they get married, I'm not interested in having children, or if they have children, they want their wife to go and work, and then they start complaining that their wife is not sharing her earnings with them. Habibi, who's the man? Who's the man in the relationship? Aren't you the man? And shouldn't you be the provider? And shouldn't you be the one that sustains the family? And this is something that the Prophet ﷺ has instructed us to fulfill. Prior to me getting married, I had made a certain amount of money, and I said, you know what, I want to go and make Hajj. My parents had a big blowout with me, and they said, no, you should go and get married with this money. And I said, well, I was being very smart. I went against my family, and I said, look, Hajj is a fard, and marriage is a sunnah. So I told my parents, I want to fulfill the fard because it's compulsory, and marriage is a sunnah. And the fact is that marriage is a sunnah. If you are not able to get married, if you can't find somebody to marry, then you are not punished for it. Ibn Taymiyyah never got married, but he was Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, who dedicated his life to the betterment of Islam. I guarantee you that's not why you don't want to get married. Now, once I completed my Hajj and I had saved up enough money to get married and I found a candidate, I got married. So for my parents, I apologize for going against your wishes. However, I think it kind of worked itself out. Nonetheless, it wasn't an issue of me saying, I don't want to get married, or they're going and seeing girl after girl and after girl and finding these little things that bother me. Oh, she's a redhead and I want someone who's a brunette. Usually it's the other way around, but oh, she's got gray eyes and I want somebody who has blue eyes. What? And so on and so forth. You come up with these really silly things and you sabotage yourself so that you do not proceed with one of the requirements if you can afford to do so. If you can afford to get married, then do so. من استطاع الباءة فليتزوج. If you are able and can afford to support a wife, you should get married. This is something you have to review. Review yourself, review your family, review your friends. Kind of just audit it. Conduct an audit and say, is my best friend avoiding marriage because he can't afford it or because he's a man-child? Is my cousin not finding work because he can't find work or because he's a man-child? So I'm going to finish off with this story that kind of triggered this whole thing 11 years ago when we met up with one of my old colleagues from university. She was a friend of mine at the time where I wasn't religious and I had female friends. And once I got married, we were looking to live in a specific area, and it turns out that this colleague of mine from uni lived in that area, and so my wife got in contact with her, and we asked her a few questions regarding living in that area. Now, what we found out is that she was a single mom, that she had been married to someone, she was happy with her marriage, and then the moment that she got a child, that they conceived a child, the guy backed off, and then they divorced. He was not up to the responsibility of being a father. What does that even mean? As men, we should be able to accommodate and to adapt to different situations. For us to sort of switch off and say, no, I'm too young to be a father, or this is too much responsibility for me. And then what we found out later was that she was the one that was supporting the child. What? What? So try to identify if you have these traits. This is not something that is from the natural inclination or from being a Muslim. And you should fear for yourself if these are things that you are constantly doing, trying to avoid responsibility, trying to avoid getting married, and if you do get married, trying to avoid to have children. Do not worry about the financial burden, because the burden is alleviated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who is the sustainer and the one that will give you. Don't think like the capitalists and the non-Muslims. You have to audit yourself and your family and make sure that none of them are leaning towards the man-child description. Thank you for watching. I don't know how many people are going to watch all the way through. Obviously, it's a rant. Obviously, this is something that really bothers me. And this is a commentary on the Muslim community. And whether this is edutainment for you or not is really besides the point. All I needed to say was that this is a phenomenon that is happening to the Muslim community, and we need to take care of it, and we need to stop it wherever we see it. This is a part of enjoining good and forbidding evil. And this is an evil thing. Being a man-child and having so many of these different characteristics that you actually achieve the status of man-child is problematic. And you need to, if it's something that is in your society, you need to fight against it, and you need to educate people and make them aware that this is something that has been injected into our society to erode the society itself. This is something that there is no good. I mean, the extreme of it is this hikikimori. Enjoining good and forbidding evil goes to the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he says, if a person sees something that is evil, he should change it with his hand. And if he doesn't have the authority to do so, then he should change it with his tongue. And if he doesn't have the ability or the authority to speak out against it, then he should change it with his heart. And that is the weakest of faith. هذا أضعف الإيمان. جزاكم الله خير for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.